context or in the public school context, but making sure consistently that our young people are prepared for the challenges of the modern-day economy, which will increasingly require a college degree, if not a graduate degree, and significant training. That is why we at the CBC feel it important to make sure that we make college more affordable, not less affordable, as the GOP proposal would do. We've also been joined by a very distinguished colleague from the Lone Star State, who's been a tremendous champion on this issue and on many others in the Congress. And so I now yield to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee from the great city of Houston.
Allow me to thank both of my very good friends, the gentleman from New York and the gentleman from Nevada, for really answering the call of the American people. The First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech, but I think the most important part of speech is information. Thank you for the opportunity to share with our colleagues and share with America the pending crisis. If I might just quote from an article in the Houston Chronicle by a writer in the early part of February, Mike Tolson, that said, "Like a hurricane churning across the Gulf of Mexico, the looming federal sequestration threatens everything in its path. If the deep and automatic federal budget cuts actually take place," and he was talking about back in February, "there will be damage somewhere, perhaps a lot of somewheres." So today we're standing on the floor of the House embracing some of the historic comments as relates to the African-American community and other minority communities about the value of education. How many of us have been told by our parents that it was the door, the key to opportunity? How many of us recognize by listening to the words of Dr. Benjamin Mays, who was a leading voice at Morehouse and an educator, always spoke to the slaves rising from the ashes to be educated, to do good. And the debate between Booker T. Washington and W. Du Bois was a question of the talent and tenth, but it was also a question of those who could pull their buckets up where they stand, to be artisans, carpenters, painters, and others. But it was to learn something, to be educated. Today I stand sadly on this floor, Mr. Jeffries, and acknowledge that as I speak, one of my boards are having a meeting. They are a school district, not higher education, as we talk about tonight, but it plays into this because there's a siege upon education in America. That board and that community, the North Forest Independent School District, is fighting with every breath in their body to keep from closing after they have successfully succeeded in reaching all the goals that were given to them by the Texas Education Agency. But our governor, Governor Rick Perry, is opposed to their survival. Our commissioner, Commissioner Michael Williams, is opposed to their survival. And as well, what a contrast when just a few days ago he saved another school district, not African American, rather with the same proposal North Forest had. So I stand on the floor today to join you and acknowledge, is the siege continuing? It seems to be, because right now our friends, our Republican friends, this House, refuses to have a conference in the budget. A conference in the budget might put us in a better position than what we will be doing today, H.R. 1911. It might put us in a better position than what the Department of Education unfortunately has had to do with a reconfiguration on the Parent Plus loans. I ask why the budget conference has not been called. Why are we on the backs of people who are suffering, who want to get an education? Why are we on the backs of those, like in North Texas, who are suffering from tornadoes or the disaster today where we don't know how many lives have been lost? Why are we suffering? Why don't we have a budget conference? Why are we suffering when we recognize how much education provides? And I thank you, Mr. Horford, for this initiative to show what it means to get an education. This is what our parents told us. Less than a high school diploma, weekly earnings $451, High school diploma or GED, I spoke to a group that got a GED, 638, congratulations to them. Bachelor's degree, 1,053, and a professional degree, 1,665. This is a 2012 document, and I just want to call out these numbers of unemployment. Higher when you don't have a high school education, almost 15% and growing, 10% for a high school education, and of course the numbers go down. So it is of great concern that we now are facing legislation that is going to take the fat. Oh, let me just stop and say that. Somebody says fat, they say, oh yeah, we want to take the fat out. That is going to go to the bone of individuals who are simply trying to get an education. Sequestration is cutting NASA. It's cutting education programs. I just met some people on an airplane that said that all my programs from Rice University have been wiped out in science because of sequestration. Now my friends want to bring H.R. 1911. Rather than listen to what we could do here together, I introduced H.R. 900 with John Conyers and a number of members that said, let's end the sequestration. If we end the sequestration, we wouldn't have to bring up H.R. 1911. So let me just say these few words as I discuss these boards very quickly. Right now, it is noted that student borrowing is widespread and more than $100 billion in federal education loans are distributed every year. What that means is that that is the debt that we are putting on the children of America. A historically black college like Texas Southern University in Houston has 81% of the students receive some form of student assistance. They received $85 million in student financial aid. This is a school that has 92%, well, let me just say this. In terms of student loans debt, 92% of those students are African Americans, 85% are Hispanic students. This is overall. 85% are Native American students, 82% are multiracial students, and 77% are white students. Last year, I introduced the College Literacy, Finance, and Economics Act of 2011 to help our students manage their debt. But now we find ourselves facing an uphill battle, and that is the introduction of this legislation that I believe is probably the worst that we could ever have. Let me explain it to you and see what H.R. 1911 does. We're right now at 3.4%. That looks like it's reasonable. If this bill passes this week, by July 1st, we will be up to 6.8%. Excuse me. By July 1st, if we don't do anything, we'll be 6.8%, $8,880 in interest to be paid. But if we pass H.R. 1911, we'll be at $10,109 in interest. Isn't this a disgrace, a shame on a nation that encourages our young people, whether they go in business or not, to get an education? And then, as Mr. Jeffries mentioned, the Congressional Black Caucus has taken on the burden of a horrific burden that has been put on our parents, something called Parent Plus. In fact, I was looking at the numbers from Texas Southern University who said they lost 450 students, and they don't know if they've got all the numbers because the Parent Plus loan program caused students to drop out by the thousands across America. By the thousands. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus and our chairwoman, Chairwoman Fudge, for waking up this issue along with our members on our Education Committee from the Congressional Black Caucus, because this is what is happening under the Parent Plus program, already bad under current law in terms of the interest paid, $27,956. But look what will happen under H.R. 1911, would force parents to pay 28% more on their loan, $35,848. A debt on parents is a debt on the children. The parents got ill. If the parents lost their jobs, if the parents had other children to take care of, and that one student that they invested in and they loved, trying to get the others to come up behind them, parents meaning well, doing well, and you're going to burden them with this, burden on top of that the student that is trying to increase their income. So I would simply say that we're facing tragedy in our country with bad weather, but we're facing a tsunami of disaster on the floor of the House with a lack of a budget, with a sequester that is now getting into the seams of our life by causing enormous debt and legislative initiatives that are unwise and devastating. And so I'd ask today that we move on the budget conference, and I ask the Speaker to bring up H.R. 900, a simple sentence. It says to remove the sequestration from the 2011 Budget Act and go back to regular order. Many of us are looking at amendments offered by the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, whose legislation we supported last year, but we want anything but this devastating bill that is going to snatch the opportunity and the dignity of education from those who are trying. I close on the remarks of President Obama as he spoke to the historic Morehouse College this past Sunday. Thank him for visiting with those young men. And he talked about a young man who had a rough upbringing, a difficult upbringing. And he congratulated that young man because that young man had now graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Morehouse College and is going on to Harvard Law School. I can assure you that that young man had his own stick-to-itness, but also that the young men in those colleges, like Morehouse, have loans and depend upon financial aid, generally speaking. And so what Mr. Obama conveyed to those young men, that the sky is the limit, that there should be no obstacles in front of you. Don't blame anyone else. Keep climbing up the ladder. And we stand here on the floor this week to snatch the very promise of education out of the hands of those students, no matter what race they are. Snatch it out of their hands with a devastating, crafty, expensive trickery such as H.R. 1911. I pray, as I go to my seat, I pray that wisdom will take charge and that members of Congress will come together and defeat H.R. 1911 and put on the floor of the House the legislation that has been offered by many on this side of the aisle to be able to ensure that those individuals, parents and children, continue to claim the American dream no matter where you walk from, no matter what story you have to tell, no matter what your racial or ethnic background is. I'm glad that the CBC is standing here today to tell our story and to speak for America. With that, I yield back. And I thank the gentleman for his courtesy.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from the great state of Texas for laying out in very clear terms the two different visions that exist here in the House of Representatives as it relates to how to deal with access to higher education. The CBC vision is a clear one. We want to increase opportunity to a college degree because we recognize that it's a gateway to the American dream. The other side, unfortunately, has put forth a plan that will help snatch that opportunity away, make it more expensive, increase the debt burden. And unfortunately, this one particular issue as it relates to the student loan dynamic fits within a broader dichotomy as to how we approach dealing with the problems in America. We believe in a balanced approach that invests in America and education and prepares our young people for the challenges of the 21st century economy. But the other side seems to have taken the approach that they're going to balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable here in America, and that includes young people who are trying to pursue a college education. That's what their budget proposal says. Take away $168 billion in higher education funding, and then at the same time, when on July 1st, student loan rates may double, put forth a bill that has been articulated to have made the problem worse if, in fact, it is ever enacted into law. We're pleased that we've been joined once again by my distinguished co-anchor, Stephen Horsford, who represents the great state of Nevada. And so I now yield to my good friend, Congressman Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the co-anchor, to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from New York, Representative Jeffries. I appreciate your leadership and the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus in focusing this hour on such an important issue as the cost, the increasing cost of attending higher education in this country. You know, Mr. Speaker, this week graduations are being held across the country. Families are celebrating the achievement of students who have worked hard for the last 4 years or more to earn their degree. So I find it ironic that on this week, when Americans are celebrating the achievement of students who have worked so hard, that my colleagues on the other side would propose such a hypocritical piece of legislation as H.R. 1911. H.R. 1911 is nothing but a bait-and-switch scheme that makes attending college more expensive. Can you imagine that? Proposing a piece of legislation that costs the American people more to go to college? People are already struggling to go to college as it is. According to the CBO estimates, federal student interest rates will be higher than current fixed rates for millions of borrowers. That means that if you're financing your college now, it's likely you will be paying more once you graduate under the Republican plan than you would today. H.R. 1911 makes student loan interest rates change year to year based on the 10-year Treasury note, marked up by 2.5% to 4.5%. So to be plain, when next year's freshmen graduate and start having to repay their loans in 2017, their interest rate on that loan taken out in their freshman year is projected to be 7.4%, more than double today's current 3.4% rate for subsidized Stafford loans. For a freshman starting college this fall who borrows the maximum annual loan under the Department of Education, their subsidized and unsubsidized loan program, they will pay about $2,000 more in interest under H.R. 1911. Now, why is this so appalling? We recently learned that the Department of Education this year alone is expected to make $51 billion in profit off of students financing their education. Now, some of you may ask, how is it that the Department of Education is making a $51 billion profit when American families and students are struggling to even pay the tuition costs that they have? You know, we teach our children that it's important to save, to be responsible with their money, and to get a good education. But with the system set up the way it is right now, those goals are mutually exclusive. How are students supposed to save? When will they be able to pay off a record $1.1 trillion in debt that they are saddled with now? It was just reported that there is more debt on student loans than there are in credit card payments in America. How do we begin to consider to plan their lives, to prepare to buy a home when they're trapped under a mountain of debt? You know, I have students that come to me when we have Congress on our college campuses, and they express great fear and trepidation about their future. They're working so hard. I have single parents who are literally taking every dollar from the 2 jobs that they work to be able to afford their college tuition. And I cannot go back to them and tell them that my colleagues on the other side proposed a bill that makes the college cost for their loans to double. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable when companies like J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo reported a combined profit of $51.9 billion, and the Department of Education has the same amount of profit as those four companies combined. And so, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus, I got to say that we've got to tackle H.R. 1911. We have to figure out a way to come up with amendments to keep the interest rates on college loans at 3.4% as they are now, or to ensure that they're capped at a level that is predictable for students. But we also have to address this other underlying issue. It is not fair to American students that they are working harder and harder, that their families are struggling, and yet there's a $1 billion profit that's going to the Department of Education, a $51 billion profit that comes back and goes to the Treasury to pay down the debt, and yet corporations continue to get tax incentives and corporate subsidies. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. Enough is enough. When are we going to require major corporations to do their part? Enough is enough. College students in America have worked too hard. Families have struggled for too long. The hope of a college education that so many people strive for is costing more and more, and now my colleagues on the other side want it to cost even more. And so we're here tonight to say no. That is not going to happen, not on our watch, and we're going to fight and work hard until it does not. Now, I got two questions to my colleague, and then I'm going to yield back the time. I tweeted out hashtag CBC Talks, and I asked constituents to send in a question or two that I could respond to. I was asked by constituent David Webb, a counselor. He said, wouldn't increasing student loans, the student loan interest rate, discourage minorities' ability to go to college? Well, absolutely. The answer to that is yes. If the cost to attend college and take out loans for college will double, it's already too high now. Too many students are foregoing their chance to get a college education because they can't afford it. This will just make it worse. I was also asked by constituent Troy Amaro. He asked if H.R. 1330 is passed by using the 10-10 scenario, what happens to the rest of the debt that is unpaid? So I want to thank him for his question, and I know we are working on the Student Loan Fairness Act, which offers a 10-to-10 repayment plan that would require borrowers to make 10 years of payment on their federal student loans at a 10% rate of their discretionary income. And then once that period is done, then the loan would be forgiven. Those are the types of solutions that we need to be working on so that college can be more affordable for the American student and the American family. And I'm hopeful to my co-anchor and to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus that we will continue to raise our voice on this issue and to make it clear that the proposal by our colleagues on the other side, H.R. 1991, is not a solution. It is costing the American people more for college at a time when they can least afford it. I yield back.
Thank the distinguished gentleman for raising some very eloquent points and doing it in such a thoughtful and passionate way. These are solutions, Mr. Speaker, that we really should be discussing in the context of a conference committee to come to some resolution around the budget. Now, for about 4 years, members of the other side of the aisle were complaining about the absence of regular order. But this year, we passed the budget in the House of Representatives. In March, the Senate then passed their budget plan. In the same month, the President came back in April after we got back from recess, presented his budget. The next step in regular order, which the House GOP has been asking for 4 years, would be to appoint conferees so the Senate and the House can sit down and work it out, discuss some of the solutions that Representative Horsford and other representatives of the American people have put forth to deal with our economic situation, make higher education more affordable, and provide businesses with the certainty that they need. And so the question is, what is the House GOP afraid of? Why haven't you appointed conferees so we can sit down and have a discussion to work out the issues and the problems that are confronting the American people? We've been joined by another distinguished member of the freshman class, the newest or one of the newest members of the House of Representatives, Representative Robin Kelly from the great state of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for your leadership, Congressman Jeffries. This weekend, 3 students very close to me celebrated their college graduations. Brace Clement at the University of Wisconsin, Amelia Lumpkin at Davidson College, and Whitney Horn at the Illinois Institute of Technology. These 3 young people represent the best and brightest this country has to offer. Congratulations, Brace, Amelia, and Whitney. I am extremely proud of you. They are just 3 of the thousands of students across the country who celebrated their college graduations this weekend. It's a joyous time that for some is also a nervous time because more students than ever are walking across the stage weighed down by student loan debt. The cost of a college degree has increased by more than 1,000% in the last 30 years, according to a report by the Center for American Progress. 2/3 of students who earn 4-year degrees graduate with an average student loan debt of more than $25,000, according to the report. Today, 37 million students are facing student loan debt, and the total student loan debt burden tops $1.1 trillion. The mounting student debt is stunting the growth of a generation of graduates who are facing a tough job market, and high student loan payments are putting off key milestones such as buying a house or starting a family, which further stifles the country's economic recovery. The problem is most acute among students of color, with 81% of African American students graduating in debt compared to 64% of white students. And not only are more black students graduating with debt, they are graduating with higher levels of debt. According to the report, 27% of black bachelor degree recipients have more than $30,000 in debt compared to 16% of their white counterparts. It is against this backdrop that student loan rates are set to double on July 1st. A Republican bill being considered this week would have student loan interest rates change year to year based on the 10-year Treasury note, a move that could push rates as high as 7.4%. This is unacceptable. Raising interest rates on student loans would be pricing out students out of the American dream. At a time when a college degree is more vital than ever to national and global competitiveness, we would be putting the goals of attaining a degree further out of reach of our young people, particularly young people of color. Our students, many of whom have graduated to find themselves unemployed or underemployed, are already struggling to pay back loans at the current rate level and are facing years, and in some cases decades, of loan payments ahead. Raising the rates on students who are already struggling to make ends meet is just wrong, counterproductive, and will have a chilling effect on future generations of students who will be forced to forego an education due to skyrocketing cost. We should be opening more avenues to a college education for young people, not slamming the door shut in their faces. I agree with my colleagues that a 2-step approach is needed to address the student loan crisis. We should first freeze the current rate, 3.4%, on subsidized Stafford loans for the next 2 years and keep other educational loan rates steady to remove the immediate fear of students and their families of the impending rate increase. We should then investigate longer-term solutions to the student loan problem as a part of a comprehensive approach to addressing our nation's mounting student debt, escalating college costs, and broken financial aid system as a whole. And in investigating options for increasing college affordability, I agree with the notion that we should, at the very least, be open to giving our students the same interest breaks we extend to banks. Our young people deserve the same backing and support. It is not only the right thing to do, but the investment in our students will net a much bigger payoff for our nation for generations to come. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for her very insightful comments. You know, it's interesting, as Representative Kelly pointed out, when the economy collapsed in 2008, created a situation where many younger Americans entered into the job market and confronted increased difficulty in securing employment in their area of study or in any other area of study. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to many of us that as we still continue to deal with a fragile economic recovery, why in the world would we shoulder these young Americans with an increased student loan debt burden in the face of an already difficult job market? That's a question that our friends on the other side of the aisle are going to have to answer this week. And I don't think that the American people will like what they have to say in that regard. We're pleased that we've been joined by the very distinguished gentleman from the great state of Virginia, someone who has spearheaded the CBC effort as it relates to our compassionate and strong and responsible budget. I'm pleased to yield to Representative Bobby Scott.
Well, thank you, and I thank you for yielding time, and I thank you for holding this important special order as we talk about college education and making it affordable. We know that a college education is extremely important to young people that can transform their entire lives and open opportunities that are not available to those without a college education. We know that the good jobs require education. 90% of the good-paying jobs in the future will require education past the high school level. Now, not necessarily a four-year college, but some education and training past the high school level. And, of course, that would include college. There's an old adage that the more you learn, the more you earn. And the more education you get, the more likely you are to have a much higher income. Now, we know that the benefits of decent education not only accrue to the individual, but also to the community, because those communities that have a well-educated constituency are much less likely to have to suffer as much crime or pay as much social services as those communities that do not invest in education. And our national economic competitiveness depends on an educated workforce. We're not going to be able to compete, for example, on low wages. There are people around the world who work for much less wages. You don't have to be near your customers or even near your coworkers anymore. We've got delivery. You can deliver things all over the world. And if you can work across the hall from your coworkers, you can work across the globe from your coworkers with a computer and a modem and an internet and everything else. The reason that businesses will want to locate in the United States is because they know they can get a well-educated, well-trained workforce. And if we allow people to fail to reach their full potential, we will not be achieving our full economic competitiveness. And so we know the benefits of education, particularly college education, and we know that some young people are looking at the high interest rates and the cost of education and are calculating that it's not worth it. And there can be nothing worse for our nation than to have young people fail to achieve their full potential because they cannot afford a college education. And so several years ago, in 2007, Congress passed a cut in the interest rate on student loans to make college more affordable, cutting the interest rate in half from 6.8% to 3.4% for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, last year, we extended it for another year. But on July 1st, in just a couple of weeks, that interest rate will double back to 6.8% if we don't do anything. Last week, the Education Workforce considered legislation to deal with the interest rate, and unfortunately, the bill recommended by the Republican side of the aisle was actually so bad that according to the Congressional Research Service, students would actually be better off if we just did nothing and let the interest rate double to 6.8% rather than take that variable interest rate that they had with the extra fees and everything else along with it. Be better off if we just let the interest rate double. We're asking young people to sign up for a variable interest rate. When they sign up, they have no idea what the interest rate would be later on, but Congressional Research Service said, based on projections, that they'd be better off with the 6.8% rate than what they're going to end up with under that Republican bill. What we should do is protect the present 3.4% interest rate for students. It's reasonable. It makes college much more affordable. Or if you're going to have a variable interest rate, have it at a low rate similar to what we're charging businesses and what they're able to borrow money at, with a protection against increases so you're no worse off with the legislation than you are today. We can help students afford college, but not with the bill that the Education and Workforce Committee considered, because that's actually worse than just letting the interest rate double. We owe it to our young people, we owe it to our next generation, and we owe it to our nation to make sure that our students get the best education that they can. And making college affordable is part of that challenge. We need to make college affordable, and we need to make sure we defeat the bill that was reported by the Education and Workforce Committee, because that's actually worse than doing nothing. Again, I thank you for holding the special order and doing what we can to make college affordable.
Thank you so much, Representative Scott, certainly for your eloquent and thoughtful observations and for pointing out what really is a very interesting fact as it relates to what we're doing here in Washington, D.C. this week, that if we just simply did nothing, if we all went back to our districts and didn't act in advance of the student loan rate doubling on July 1st, that we'd actually be better off going back home and doing nothing than if we acted upon the GOP proposal, H.R. 1911, which independently and objectively has been proven to show that it would make the situation, which is bad now, worse for millions and millions and millions of American students. That's why so many of our constituents are cynical about a lot of the things that happen down here in Washington, D.C. We've been joined by another distinguished member of the freshman class, someone who herself had a very prominent career prior to arriving here in the House of Representatives in higher education, as well as a leader in the Ohio legislature. I'm pleased to yield now to the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio, Representative Joyce Beatty.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me also join my colleagues in thanking Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Horsford for leading the Congressional Black Caucus's important discussion about rising burdens of student loans on our families and on our economy. Higher education is a major part of the American dream. I know as a college graduate, and I know as a senior administrator at a university. Access to higher education must continue to be an option for the American dream to continue to be a reality. The increasing financial burden higher education is placing on students, families, and the economy is unsustainable and threatens our country's economic progress. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, almost 13% of student loan borrowers of all ages owe more than $50,000, and nearly 4% owe more than $100,000. These debts are often beyond the student's ability to repay, which is demonstrated by the fact that delinquency and fault rates are soaring. This week, the Smarter Solutions for Students Act, H.R. 1911, will come to the floor. Unfortunately, it is partisan legislation and is not a sufficient solution to address our nation's student loan crises. And it's certainly worth repeating, as you have heard and you will repeatedly hear. In fact, it makes students worse off than if nothing is done to stop the increasing variable interest rates. This bill actually would increase the cost of students' loans for borrowers, discourage the use of federal loans, and exacerbate the country's troubling student debt problem. Under this bill, interest rates for student loans will balloon over the next 10 years, costing students and their parents almost $4 billion in additional loan interest charges. As a former college administrator with numerous colleges in my district, I believe pursuing higher education is one of the best personal and professional investments one can make in your future. With the tens of thousands of students within my district, the impact of the student loan crises is monumental for my community. That is why I have co-sponsored several pieces of legislation that will work to decrease the fiscal strain higher education can place on students. I've co-sponsored the Student Loan Fairness Act, sponsored by Representative Bass, which is legislation designed to lend a helping hand to those struggling under massive amounts of students' loans. This legislation actually caps interest rates for federal loans and improves and expands public service loans forgiveness and creates a 10-10 loan repayment plan. We must keep our education loan rates stable, responsible, and affordable. We must find a solution that will allow college students to benefit from the 3.4% interest rates on subsidized Stanford loans. We must advance legislation that includes student loan reform in a way that provides realistic opportunities for our students to secure good jobs and pay off their student loans without falling into financial crises. I will continue to advocate for better ways to lessen the financial burden of higher education for all students in this country. Our nation's students and families deserve an affordable education. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio for her great leadership on this issue. Mr. Speaker, would you be so kind as to let us know how many minutes are remaining in today's special order?
The gentleman has 9 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much. We've been joined now by another dynamic member of the freshman class who arrived a couple of months earlier than the rest of us. He has gotten off to a tremendous start. And I now yield to my distinguished colleague from the Garden State, Representative, the always nattily dressed, Donald Payne, Jr.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for anchoring tonight's CBC special order on student loans, and thank Congressman Jeffries for that kind observation. Access to quality education is the basis of the American dream. In 1965, the Higher Education Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson, a former rural schoolhouse teacher who fully understood that education is the greatest equalizer. Since then, student aid in this country has been a springboard that gives hardworking students with low to moderate income the opportunity to realize their goals and transcend economic status. The federal Pell Grant program helps more than 9 million students get to and through college. Unfortunately, while Pell Grants cover a significant portion of tuition. Currently, it pays for less than 1/3 of a student's tuition at most four-year public colleges. Given rising tuition costs and the decline in family incomes, the importance of financial aid has only increased with time. The cost of college tuition in the U.S. has increased by more than 1,000%. Yes, 1,000% since the 1980s. This is more than the growth in the Consumer Price Index. At the same time, the federal Pell Grant is covering an even smaller percentage of the overall college cost. As a result, the success of our graduates is being hampered by mounting debt. 2/3 of college seniors who graduated in 2011 accumulated more than $26,000 in student loan debt. And I am increasingly concerned about New Jersey's graduates who hold the 10th highest debt among college students in our nation. And while the cost of an education rises and the amount of the student debt skyrockets, young people struggle to find work. They've done everything we've asked them to do. They've worked hard, they've gotten an education, but unemployment for young college graduates remains at 8.8%. So our graduates' dreams of making it on their own are stifled. They are forced to put their lives on hold, move back home with their parents, and pinch pennies to pay off their mounting debt. Not only does this debt negatively impact the quality of life for our young people, but it weakens our economy and our workforce as well. Financial constraints caused by student loan debt discourage recent graduates from pursuing public service jobs and medical fields that serve our seniors in low-income communities. Yet, knowing all of this, my Republican colleagues have been working overtime to exacerbate the problem and make college even less affordable. In 2014, the 2014 budget eliminates mandatory funding for Pell Grants and freezes the maximum grant for 10 years, while also cutting eligibility. As of July 1st, federal student loan rates are set to double. Instead of adopting efforts to keep interest rates low for young people in a volatile economic environment, my Republican colleagues have introduced a bill and are voting on it this week that can increase rates far beyond this July increase. As I like to call it, it's the Making College More Expensive Act. Mr. Speaker, I beg your patience as I go through a little rudimentary arithmetic. Right now, student loan interest rates are fixed at 3.4%, meaning a student pays about $4,000 in interest payments on a 5-year loan. If we do nothing and the interest rate expires this July, rates will double to 6.8%, and a student will pay nearly $9,000 more than the double on the same 5-year loan. Now, if we do what the Republicans want us to do and pass their bill this week, student loan interest will skyrocket to an estimated 7.4%, and the same student would pay $10,000 in interest. In other words, if we do absolutely nothing, nothing at all, it would be better than if we passed the Republicans' proposed bill in the House. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do nothing. This body must act. But it is a sad reality when doing nothing is better than going along with what the Republicans are pushing. Rather than invest in our future and entrepreneurs of America, they propose to balance the budget on the backs of low to moderate income students. I fear that by ignoring a generation buried under debt, we will cripple this country's future. This great nation is supposed to be the land of opportunity for all, regardless of what you look like or where you come from. Throughout our history, the opportunities afforded to people of various backgrounds have built this nation, creating a large and thriving middle class. Access to education has been the catalyst to this growth. As we look to our future, it is critical that we place education at the forefront of the plans for our success. We can start by stopping the doubling of student loan interest rates and by once again making a college education affordable for all of those who want one. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey. As we close, this chart really illustrates the magnitude of the collective problem confronting younger Americans in the United States of America. The student loan debt burden has now exceeded $1 trillion. Now, in this chamber, we hear a lot about the debt crisis facing America, but we have a student loan debt crisis that must be addressed. I yield to my good friend Stephen Horsford for his thoughts on this matter.
Well, thank you, Representative Jeffries. And this chart and this number should alarm every American family. And as you just indicated, in this body, there are those on the other side of the aisle who talk about not burdening the next generation with a debt that they cannot afford to pay. And for us, as leaders, to do our job now so that they don't have to bear that burden in the next generation. And this is why this issue is so fundamental, Mr. Speaker, that we get this policy right, that we don't burden the next generation of students, an increasing number who are low income, who now have that opportunity for the first time ever to go to college, an increasing number who are minority students, first-generation students, who need to pursue their education without the burden of a $1 trillion debt from taking out student loans. And so just as the Huffington Post reported recently, they estimated that the spread between what the government pays to borrow and what it charges students creates a profit this fiscal year of more than 36 cents off of every dollar lent to borrowers. So the question is, why are our colleagues on the other side proposing a measure to increase interest rates on students and families? That money does not go to the Department of Education, Mr. Speaker. That money goes to the Treasury, which goes to pay down the federal debt. So the proposal on the other side actually charges students, increasingly number low-income and minority students, more money in order to pay down the federal debt so that the other side can keep corporate tax breaks for big oil, big banks, and millionaires. That's what this fundamentally comes down to, and why every American should be concerned with this policy and coming up with the democratic alternative that we're working so hard to support. I yield back.
I thank the distinguished gentleman, and we will continue to do all that we can to make college affordable for every single American. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman's time's expired.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
I'll sit.
Oh. Okay. Something for them.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
I move the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for the morning hour debate. Thank you.
The House of Representatives passed 2 bills today. The Stolen Valor Act would make it a crime for a person to seek financial gain by falsely claiming to have received a military medal. And the other bill would impose new penalties for committing violent acts against ships, such as hijacking. And it would also prohibit interfering with the operations of nuclear facilities. The House will be back in session tomorrow morning at 10 Eastern with live coverage here on C-SPAN. And with the House just going out for the night, we're going to join our First Lady series live in